My name is Etienne. I'm a sophomore at the Nueva School in San Mateo, California.
And I'm Abhinav. I'm also a sophomore at Nueva, and we're the heads of Nueva's chapter of the Indigenous Justice Coalition, which we'll get into more of the specifics later, but it's a large organization that works directly with multiple indigenous tribes, primarily the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, to help in their fight for federal recognition, apply for grants, etc. But we'll get into more of the specifics as we go down the presentation. And if you have any questions, feel free to stop us in the middle or just raise your hand and we'll make sure to call on you. Yeah. So we're going to be going over just introductions, what the organization is, its mission, steps on how we can collaborate between our different nonprofits and how that'll look like concretely. And we'll have time for more questions at the end, but feel free to ask questions in the middle if you need to.
Ooh. All right. So first is just an introduction to what the IJC is. We're a youth-driven organization. For example, Abby and I, who lead the Nueva chapter, we're high schoolers, and everyone in the organization are high schoolers. We're based in the Bay Area, just like y'all. Our mission is to amplify Indigenous voices and address systemic inequities facing Indigenous communities by furthering the initiatives that they already have. More specifically, we are currently focusing on helping the Mwekmaloni tribe gain federal recognition, which would give them a bunch of benefits like land trusts and funding and political authority through political advocacy, securing grant funding, and providing educational programs. Because we are not indigenous, we try to place the highest emphasis on not being saviorist, working directly under the oversight of the tribe and supporting the initiatives that they are supporting, just so that we can kind of aid them in achieving their missions and their goals and not superimposing ours.
Yeah. Just some statistics on our impact. We've connected with over 100 politicians. A key part of the IGC is our legislative division, where we have a bunch of high schoolers reach out to local politicians to get things like bills passed, which is really similar to what 350 is doing from the beginning part of this meeting. We also apply for a lot of grants for the tribe. We've raised $500,000 that directly help the tribe for their existing initiatives. For example, I actually helped with one of the grants that was working with air quality protection on tribal lands. So that was really interesting. And we're a really large organization across multiple high schools across the United States. So we have over like 2,200 students who are taught and mentored and kind of involved in this and kind of taught how to like reach out to politicians, how to engage, and how like a lot of like important political advocacy skills. And as I said earlier, we're a large organization. We have over 30 school chapters around the Bay. Yeah. No, not just the Bay, but around the US. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So why does this matter? Why are we advocating for the Mwekma And this kind of touches on the injustices that we both care about as organizations. There are over 66 federally unrecognized tribes in California. What does it mean to be recognized versus unrecognized? Basically, without federal recognitions, these tribes lose out on cultural protections, legal standing, and funding. For a concrete example, when the Clean Air Act was being written, recognized tribes were consulted saying, hey, is this like piece of legislation, is this what is supporting your sovereignty best? Do you have input on this? But unrecognized tribes were not consulted. So usually they were the ones that got hurt by the EPA, that kind of thing. And there's also social services like health programs, water programs that only recognized tribes are accessible to, or that only recognized tribes have access to. We particularly focus on the Muwekma Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the Bay Area, specifically the East Bay, and researchers from Stanford have confirmed that they fulfill every requirement for federal recognition, yet are unjustly denied it due to bureaucracy in the Bureau of Indian Affairs in the Washington, D.C.
And I think a key point of connection between our work and your organization's work is around like energy equity. As you can see from this graph, it's a study from the Center on Global Energy Policy in 2023. You can see that that indigenous populations are disproportionately affected by the lack of energy security or energy insecurity. And I think doing things like supporting bills that further energy equity for these groups can be really beneficial and can be a key point of interest between both our organizations. So that's something that we'll definitely touch upon throughout this presentation. Yeah.
Yeah. And if y'all are curious about any of the sources that we're citing for these things like energy equity, I just pasted in the URL to the slides, and you can see that we've cited some of our sources at the bottom here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you also want to save it for future reference, it's also there for you. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then let's talk about how, well, you're here for the 350 Bay Area meeting, not for the IJC meeting. So how can we collaborate? What are some actionable next steps? So first is legislative affairs, kind of an expansion of what y y'all were just doing just now with writing letters, that kind of thing. For example, we could research joint bill tracking that touches on both energy equity, but also the way that that energy equity disproportionately affects indigenous communities, like you can see on this graph. We could talk about mutual public comment, um, which was the advocacy that 350 has done a lot in the past and the IGC has done a lot in the past. And we could, for example, go to city councils, go advocate saying, hey, yes, we need to pass this, or hey, no, we cannot pass this. It would hurt indigenous communities in specifically the realm of climate action. Or we could write jointly signed letters to policymakers. It would be a huge way to get a broader audience and gain more legitimacy. Instead of just one person writing a letter to their representative, it was these two huge organizations that have already made a lot of impact in the past. And we could also use joint lobbying because the 350 Bay Area has the nonprofit status, 501(c)(4) to be able to lobby politically. And then I can pass it off to Abby for
Yeah.
energy equity.
Yeah, so we were thinking of making like a joint policy brief on yeah, sorry, 1 second. Do you mind if I get like 5 minutes? That's fine. Yeah. So we were thinking we could do a joint policy brief on Indigenous energy and equity. This is an area that's not really well studied, given that this population is, more underrepresented in policy making. And I think that by pulling together our expertise, we could write up a policy brief, publish it, and kind of create momentum to solve these issues in the future. And of course, as Etienne said earlier, more about like intersecting with the legislative affairs idea. Maybe it doesn't have to be limited to energy equity, but we think that's like a big point of intersection between both our initiatives, and we could jointly advocate for bills that support equity and advocate against ones that don't. And we think that would be an excellent way for us to combine our expertise.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
lastly would be kind of workshops and educational opportunities so that both organizations can learn from the knowledge that Indigenous communities have cultivated for a long time. For example, Mwekma speakers have spoken to our school, and our school body was able to learn a lot from their presentation. And we think that there's a lot of value in collaborating and utilizing the IJC's connections with the Mwekma Ohlone tribe to hold workshops, for example, on Indigenous environmental stewardship, which could shape the way that we approach issues of climate action. It could shape the way that we are trying to be sustainable because Indigenous communities have long had land revitalization and environmental stewardship like traditions that we could learn a lot from. And second, just the IJC specifically, the IJC uniquely has a lot of experience in grant writing and applying for grants, which I think is something that could bolster 350 Bay Area's mission. So that's another thing that the two organizations could collaborate on. And every single thing that we've just mentioned are all things that y'all could get involved with. These are all actionable things that we'll release more information on in the very near future. And if any of these sound interesting to you, feel free to reach out, and we'll also reach out to y'all because there's certainly opportunities to get involved with this work.
Yeah, and adding on to that, I've just sent both our emails in the chat. So if you would like to reach out to us in the future, or have any like ideas or any, or want to get more involved, just shoot us an email. We'd be happy to connect. Adding on to that, I think a lot of these initiatives, we have a lot of the foundation and groundwork at the IJC. One example is we recently hosted an Indigenous speaker in the Mwakma Ohlone tribe to give a presentation on Indigenous history and talking about the injustice that happened to the Makmaloni tribe to kind of educate our public and our student body. So we have a lot of like connections with the tribe. We have like, and we could definitely try to leverage when like working together. And as Etienne said we also do have a lot of grant writing experience. So it would definitely be an area of like intersection between both of us. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you all for listening, and we'll now open it up to any questions. If y'all are curious about
Yeah.
certain aspects of our work, curious about certain aspects of how the issues intersect, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Abhinav and Etienne. I think right off the bat, I have a few questions, but I would let others go first if anyone else has any questions or curiosities. And if not, then I'll go.
I'll go after you, Nima.
Okay. Yeah. So right off the bat, I just wanted to say that this is something that's very cool that you guys are working on. Definitely very needed. Um, I wanted to ask, like, what would you say is one of the main pressing concerns that the Wakma, I think, tribe faces, and what did you guys learn from working with them?
Etienne, you want to take this one?
Um, yeah, for sure. So because they are not federally recognized, for example, they don't have things like land trusts or land reservations, which you might have heard of in the past. What that means is that they don't have sovereign land that they have control over, which means that they're the victims of things like gentrification and urbanization, which means that I remember the policies that were just mentioned with the action items, things like or things like PG&E, things like energy prices, etc. They disproportionately affect the Mwekma Ohlone who have historically faced discrimination and are thus of lower socioeconomic status. And that's why we see the energy equity issues because they are one of the groups that is hit most hard by the corporate greed of companies like PG&E. And also, Avi, if you want to talk about
Yeah.
the clean air stuff that you
I
worked
was
on.
just about to, yeah. Yeah, so a big point of connection between both organizations more on the environmental effects. Apart from energy equity, a lot of indigenous communities, like especially in the Maloney, which I worked with personally, have a lot of their tribal lands or their neighborhoods are disproportionately affected by like pollution, like off like highways or like airports, etc. I actually worked with a startup that was given a grant to help the tribe monitor their air quality around their regions, and we found that a lot of the tribal regions had a disproportionate amount, as I said earlier, of like pollution or bad air quality. So we think that is something that's definitely affecting them and shows how like this lack of federal recognition and being victims of colonial dispossession can have like intergenerational impacts, even with the environment.
Thank you for answering that question. Yeah.
Sure. I see some question from Monica in the chat. What kind of workshops do you have? How often do we hold them? So, in regards to workshops, this is kind of a new thing. This is our first workshop that we're doing for 350. The normal structure of our organization is more around like students like getting together and like doing work. We have three different divisions: a financial division that applies for grants, a legislative one that that like reaches out to politicians to do political advocacy, and finally an outreach one that's mostly focused on social media. This is something new that we're bringing like in collaboration with you. So I would say that with ideas for workshops, I think as Etienne showed earlier, we were thinking of hosting like an indigenous speaker or discussing more about like how indigenous issues intersect with environmental ones. But I think Etienne has more ideas. Yeah.
Um, in the past, I think the workshops that have been held have usually been assemblies at high schools because this is an entirely high schooler-led organization. And what that means is that most of the presentations were background presentations, kind of just raising awareness about the daily struggles that the Mucmaloni faces and how they've been erased historically by anthropologists and colonialism, etc. So, yeah, adding an environmental stewardship lens would be pretty new, but there is a lot of background in workshops happening in general, which is that there are like the Mucmaloni has this foundation called the Muck Maloney Preservation Foundation. And what they do is they go around the community educating, raising awareness. And for 350, that could look like environmental stewardship, which was an idea that we mentioned before.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think we can see a lot of like areas where we could work together in the future. Definitely very cool, especially like learning from you guys in regards to like grant writing. That sounds like very interesting as well. And I think we mentioned that last meeting as well. So that would be something that we could work together in the future. Definitely, I will loop you guys back in the emails with Zoe so we can like figure something out. Yeah, but thank you guys so much for coming and presenting today.
Yeah, of course. Thank y'all for having us and listening. And we'll release it. And like once again, we'll release in once we have the information, we'll release information on actionable steps that 350 members can do to get involved. And if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out to us. Avi did add our emails to the chat.
Yeah, we're also on the Signal, so if you want to DM us there or just like ask a general question on the chat, that also works too, if that's easier.